These are the stories that will make you think twice before stepping onto the trail. From mysterious vanishings in dense forests to gruesome encounters with nature's dark side, these are the hikes that turn deadly. Whether you're an avid outdoorsman or someone who just enjoys a good thrill, get ready to be chilled to the bone. From eerie last messages to shocking discoveries, this is 2 hours of the most disturbing hiker deaths of all time. At the end of March 1988, 18-year-old Inga Maria Hauser left her home in Munich, Germany, and embarked on the trip of a lifetime. Despite her young age, Inga Maria was a confident and self-sufficient young woman. She was independent and had a strong desire to travel and discover the world. That snowy March, Inga Maria chose England as her first destination, the very starting point of her journey. Inga's mother, father, and sister dropped her off at a train station. Unbeknownst to her family, this would be the last time they ever saw Inga alive. Inga Maria's first stop was London. She fell in love with the city and made sure to let her family know. She sent them a postcard writing that she was entranced by London. She even phoned her mother to gush about her trip thus far. Inga Maria spent a few more days in London before leaving for Oxford on Sunday morning, the 3rd of April. While in Oxford, she stayed at a youth hostel. A journal entry she wrote during that time reads, "Stayed at the youth hostel, ate too much, decided to go to Bath." During these days, Inga Maria sent her family another postcard, telling them just how much she liked England. She wished she'd stay a year longer. She commended the English, whom she thought kind and ready to help. Inga asked her family not to worry about her, feeling that she would be safe. Inga Maria left Bath on the 5th of April, before moving on to Cambridge, from where she traveled to Bristol and then Liverpool. She was always on the move, wanting to see as much of the country as she could. In the early hours of Wednesday, the 6th of April, the young woman caught a night train to Inverness, leaving England for the far north of Scotland. She sent another postcard from Inverness, letting her family know her journey was going smoothly, though she admitted her money was slowly running out. The same day, on April 6th, Inga Maria traveled to Stranraer. There, she boarded a ferry to Larne in Ireland. She had 3 more days before she was supposed to meet up with a friend in Wales, so why not spend these days doing even more exploring? Her last ever journal entry reads, "Wonder where I stay tonight. Need more money." The ferry docked late that night, leaving Inga Maria only a short window to board the train destined for Belfast, the way she intended to. But Inga Maria never made it on the train. 2 weeks later, a sheep farmer found Inga Maria Hauser lying dead in Ballypatrick Forest Park, near Ballycastle in County Antrim, about an hour's drive away from Larne. She was out in the open, lying face down on the ground just off a dirt track. Police were called and an investigation began immediately, given the violent circumstances of Inga Maria's death. It was obvious that the young woman had suffered tremendously before her death. She was beaten around the face and head. DNA evidence found on her body indicated she had suffered an attempted sexual assault. Her neck was broken as a result of what police would describe as a ruthless, vicious attack. Her belongings were scattered around her body with the notable exception of her passport, which was missing. Police were able to identify Inga Maria because they found her identity card. But why take her passport and leave her ID card out in the open? And why leave the body out in the open? It was as if Inga Maria's killer wished for his crime to be witnessed. But how did Inga Maria, an independent, cautious young woman, arrive in Ballypatrick Forest? Her family was adamant that Inga Maria wouldn't have ever entered the car of an unknown man. But all evidence indicated that she was driven to Ballypatrick Forest on the night of April 6th, and as detectives would eventually conclude, she had to be driven by someone who knew the forest like the back of his hand, since Inga Maria was found in a remote area. A clinical pathologist later concluded that Inga Maria's neck was broken at the murder scene, but that it is possible that the attempted sexual assault and beating took place elsewhere. The case was baffling, and police had no conclusive leads. They managed to create a full DNA profile, but despite the largest DNA screening the UK had ever seen, they failed to find a match. It's been 36 years since Inga Maria Hauser was brutally assaulted and killed. No one has been convicted of the crime. Her father died in 2006 and her mother died in 2019. They spent their lives mourning their youngest daughter. Inga Maria's older sister hasn't recovered from the tremendous loss. Her family wishes for peace, but for now, the killer remains at large. It was August 29, 2018. Diana Bober was a 55-year-old avid hiker from Gresham, Oregon. That Wednesday, the petite woman set out to hike the Hunchback Trail, one of the most popular hikes in Mount Hood National Forest, Oregon. Most of Diana's family lived out of state, but they still kept in touch. The woman spoke with some of them before setting out on her trip alone. Despite being a petite woman, Diana was independent. She would hike alone several times a week. She wasn't really a survivalist and didn't carry a tent in her backpack, but she was full of life and ideas, an outdoors woman through and through. How could she have possibly known that that particular hike would be her very last one? Armed only with her backpack and her liveliness, Diana set out on her trip. She parked her car at the base of Mount Hood and began her day hike, but she never made it back. A day later, on August 30th, 2 hikers found Diana Bober's backpack. It was abandoned, and there was no sign of its petite, red-headed owner. The 2 hikers reported their findings. A few days later, Diana Bober's out-of-state family reported her missing. They last heard from her on August 29th. It was clear to them that something was wrong. They feared Diana was in danger or worse. Diana's family members chose to fly to Oregon from Virginia and Texas to be together. The woman's car was found at the Zigzag Ranger Station. Rescue crews found Diana Bober on Monday, September 10, 2018. She was dead. Her body was discovered down a steep incline at the bottom of a ravine, roughly 300 feet off the Hunchback Trail, about a mile from where she had parked her car on August 29th. But how did she die? An autopsy made some shocking discoveries. Diana Bober had a broken neck, but she also had more than a dozen puncture wounds to the nape of her neck. Her hands were also wounded. Her injuries were consistent with an animal attack, and more specifically, a cougar attack. According to Diana's sister, the woman had tried to fight off the animal using a sharp object, a stick and repellent spray. Oregon's wilderness is home to more than 6,000 cougars, but these animals very rarely attack humans. So why did the animal target Diana Bober? To find the answers to this question, authorities first had to catch the animal. 4 days after the discovery of the body, on September 14th, a trail camera captured footage of a large cougar. Search dogs were used to find the big cat, which was shot and killed off the Hunchback Trail that afternoon. The cougar's body was sent to southern Oregon for analysis, but the lab wasn't able to extract DNA from any of the evidence provided, which included Diana's clothing. This happened because of the rainy weather and the significant lag between when Diana's body was found and the date the attack likely happened. Even more, officials couldn't determine why the attack happened, given that the cougar wasn't emaciated, nor was it rabid or otherwise diseased. The animals also hadn't had kittens in years, so it didn't kill Diana Bober out of maternal instinct. However, according to the state police report, all available evidence indicates that this particular cougar was responsible for Diana Bober's demise. The sun had just begun to dip behind the towering peaks of the Andes Mountains when the unthinkable happened on July 7, 2022. Alan Dawson Miles, a 22-year-old British tourist on a hiking adventure with friends, slipped and fell 65 feet down a steep ravine. A joyful excursion in one of the world's most breathtaking locations instantly became every traveler's worst nightmare. Miles and his companions were exploring the stunning vistas near the ancient Incan ruins of Machu Picchu when the tragic misstep occurred. The remote mountainside trails that weave through the Andes offer spectacular panoramic views and pose serious hazards for the unprepared or unlucky hiker. The group was just taking in the incredible scenery when one of them looked over his shoulders and noticed that Alan was gone. Suddenly, Alan slipped through the edge of the cliff and hit the rugged ground with a resounding thud. The group was instantly shocked upon witnessing the tragedy unfold before their eyes, but the initial shock was turned into a frantic bid to save Alan. Evans and the other hikers frantically raised the alarm, but the remote location challenged summoning emergency assistance. By the time rescue crews were able to locate and airlift the gravelly injured Miles to a hospital in Cusco, excessive blood loss and catastrophic head injuries had left him in hypovolemic shock and clinging to life. Dr. Carlos Ramirez, the attending physician, solemnly delivered the devastating prognosis. Alan Dawson Miles suffered a severe skull fracture and sudden trauma to the head that caused irreparable damage. Despite the team's best efforts to stabilize him, the injuries proved too severe. He passed away shortly after arriving at the hospital. In a statement, the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO, confirmed that Miles's family had been notified of the heart-wrenching loss. The Bureau extends our deepest condolences to the family. It immediately confirms that their staff in Peru remain in close contact with local authorities as they investigate the circumstances surrounding this tragedy. For now, more questions than answers remain about the fateful hiking trip turned calamity. What caused the experienced hiker to lose his footing on the trail? Were proper safety precautions and gear employed for the inherently risky activities? And perhaps most haunting, could this devastating outcome have been prevented? The ancient Incan citadel of Machu Picchu, the bucket list destination that lures thousands of tourists to Peru yearly, now casts an air of sad irony. The iconic granite structures built to outlast the ages briefly served as a stunning final panorama for a young traveler whose life was tragically cut short by the awe-inspiring but unforgiving mountains themselves. As the local police investigation into Miles's death presses forward, the family he leaves behind is left grasping for answers amidst their all-consuming grief. While each perilous adventure holds unforeseen risks, no loved one should endure a knock on the door delivering a parent's worst fear, that a joyful journey of discovery instantly turned fatal. So we are left to wonder, is pursuing life's breathtaking vistas and exhilarating thrills worth immense risks? Where is the line between embracing the wanderlust of adventure travel and reckless overconfidence in conquering the hazards of Mother Nature? Tragic stories like that of Alan Dawson Miles, a life abruptly extinguished in one of the world's most beautiful yet deadly settings, starkly raise those somber questions. It was a bitterly cold afternoon when Li-Fei Ada Huang set off for her solo hike in the rugged terrain of the San Gabriel Mountains on February 4, 2024. But Mount Baldy, which is known for its breathtaking vistas and treacherous paths, was about to be hit by a historic storm. A ferocious atmospheric river storm was brewing, ready to unleash its fury on Southern California. Li-Fei was 22 years old and a University of California Irvine student. She was also an avid hiker who often preferred to travel alone. That Sunday, she texted her friends to let them know about her plans to hike solo. At around 1:59 p.m., she sent a video to her boyfriend as she approached the trail parking lot. Over the next 2 hours, the young woman posted several videos on social media, showing the snow-covered hills surrounding her and the steep drop into the valley. The weather was far from being gentle. At about 4 p.m. that day, communication stopped. By the time Huang's friends and family realized she was missing, it was nearly midnight. Panic set in as they dialed 911, desperate for help. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department quickly sprang into action, assembling the West Valley Search and Rescue Crew. These seasoned professionals knew the mountains well, but even they were daunted by the impending storm. At 2:30 a.m., the rescue crew reached Mount Baldy. The mountain was laden with heavy snow. Despite their best efforts, they found no trace of Huang. As dawn broke on February 5th, the storm's full wrath descended. The National Weather Service issued flood, winter storm, and high wind advisories for approximately 40 million people. The rescue operation became a battle against nature itself. Heavy snowfall and avalanche risks hampered their every move. The search teams were eventually forced to retreat because they were in danger. By then, the mountain was effectively buried in snow. On the 6th day, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a civilian whose drone had spotted what seemed to be a human body. But the treacherous conditions persisted, and rescuers couldn't immediately reach the location of the body. The search teams made camp on the mountain, braving the freezing night. The rescuers found Li-Fei Huang, lifeless in the upper San Antonio Creek Falls area at 7:45 a.m. on Sunday, a week after her disappearance. Her body was airlifted off the mountain. The cause of Li-Fei Huang's death remains undisclosed, with some people speculating whether Li-Fei had knowingly chosen to be on the mountain during the storm. The admission came in a hushed crackle over the radio. The search team relayed the message stating that they had found a body in a crevasse. Just like that, the frantic 9-day search for Harry Greaves, a 29-year-old British adventurer who vanished during a solo trek near Machu Picchu, had come to a tragic end high in the jagged peaks of the Peruvian Andes. For his father, Simon, back in the village of Bronigarth, Shropshire, the devastating news marked the end of an agonizing search, but also the heartbreaking loss of a profoundly philosophical son who lived with passion and wonder. The grieving father remembered Harry as someone who touched so many lives with his spirit and booming laugh, adding that the adventurous explorer would be missed by many. An inquest later confirmed the body found on April 20th was that of Harry Greaves, who had traveled to South America's iconic mountain region to celebrate his 29th birthday with an extended solo expedition through the dense jungle. A coroner ruled his death in the remote Andes was a tragic accident. The furniture maker had been backpacking for weeks with friends, marveling at Peru's natural splendors and indigenous cultures. But as his birthday on the 9th of April approached, Greaves told his companions he wished to spend it alone amongst the misty peaks, a period of solitary reflection before the next chapter of his life. His friends expected him to rejoin their party 2 days later, but Greaves never returned from his unique birthday journey. As the hours stretched into days with no sign of the experienced outdoorsman, a frantic search was launched across the treacherous Andean terrain by local authorities and the Lucy Blackman Trust, a British charity. Helicopters, drones, and scores of volunteers combed the jagged valleys and mountainsides, dreading with every passing sunset the possibility that Greaves had fallen victim to the unforgiving wilderness. They scoured riverbanks, caves, and cliff faces, finally zeroing in on his last known coordinates, an ancient Incan trail near the famed ruins of Machu Picchu, where he had separated from friends. It was there on the 20th that his body was discovered nearly 2 weeks after vanishing, having plunged into a deep crevasse, possibly while navigating the steep trails alone. Based on his remaining rations, authorities believe Greaves perished around the time of his 29th birthday on April 9th. For his father, Simon, the tragedy was a cruel bookend to a life defined by Harry's insatiable curiosity and love of the natural world. In the weeks before his fateful final expedition, Greaves had recorded poems and ruminations about life on his dad's computer, with titles like A Life Lived in Love and What It Is to Be a Man. The emotional audio files became a source of comfort for the grieving family, as they mourned a caring soul who packed more living into his 29 years than many experiences in a lifetime. The devastating accident that occurred with Harry in Peru's remote mountains remains a tragic reminder of the risks inherent to his wanderlust spirit. But his loved ones take solace in knowing he departed this world while immersed in the natural wonders he loved most. Amidst his demise, several questions linger. What drove Harry Greaves to seek solitude in the Peruvian Andes on his birthday? Could his fate have changed if he hadn't embarked on a solo journey? What thoughts and emotions were swirling in Harry's mind during his solitary reflection in the misty peaks? Regardless, one thing is sure, that in the jagged peaks and ancient trails of Peru, the memory of this young explorer will linger like the ethereal clouds brushing the mountaintops, a lasting reminder that a life lived purposefully, if cut short too soon, is one worth celebrating. It was the early hours of March 5, 2019. 23-year-old Catherine Shaw was a yoga teacher from the serene village of Long Hanborough, near Whitney in Oxfordshire, who had embarked on a journey to Central America, not knowing that it would forever change her life and the lives of those who knew her. Catherine was staying with a friend at the Eco Hotel in the San Pedro Lake Aitlan area. That night was a restless one for the 23-year-old. She was seen leaving the hostel at about 1:37 a.m. before returning at 3:19 a.m., only to depart again at 5:32 a.m., accompanied only by a stray puppy she'd found somewhere in the area. Catherine had a clear purpose that morning. She loved sunrises and wanted to watch this upcoming one from the perfect spot. Little did she know this hike would be her last. When she failed to return to her hotel, Catherine's friend reported her missing, worrying for her safety. Catherine had left her passport, money, and mobile phone behind. There was no way to reach her. The news of her disappearance quickly spread, sparking a massive search operation. Helicopters buzzed overhead and sniffer dogs scoured the rugged terrain. Authorities also employed the use of drones and a dive team. Catherine's friends launched a social media campaign to raise awareness. Her parents, Tarquin and Anne Shaw, released a video appeal, desperately seeking any information about their daughter. For days, the search continued with an air of hope mingled with dread. The situation grew even more bizarre when 2 separate discoveries were made. Catherine's jacket was found on a mountain trail not far from where she was last seen, and a puppy, which she had been seen with, was found shivering and crying on a hiking trail near El Naudis Mountain. On Monday, March 11th, any hope of finding Catherine alive was shattered. Police discovered Catherine's body about 100 meters from the Indian Nose Trail, in a wooded, uninhabited area. Catherine was found naked and in a state of decomposition, which prompted much online speculation about foul play. The speculation was further fueled by a post-mortem examination, which concluded that Catherine had died of multiple injuries, including severe hemorrhaging caused by a traumatic brain injury. But an inquest into Catherine's death shed light on the circumstances of her passing, thus putting an end to all speculation. According to Coroner Salter, Catherine had likely been deceased for 4 to 6 days before her body was found. Even more, it was revealed that Catherine was a very spiritual person, and as her father put it, quite capable of removing her own clothing, embracing her natural surroundings with a refreshing lack of self-consciousness. According to her family, Catherine had been fasting in the days prior to her disappearance. This indicated that Catherine may have passed out or fallen due to her lack of intake of food and fluid, causing the wounds to her body. Catherine's plans had been to explore the volcanic landscapes of Central America before heading to a festival in Colombia, a testament to her adventurous spirit and love for life.
On Monday, September 14, 2015, a group of 7 hikers set out to explore Keyhole Canyon in Zion National Park, which by the usual estimates should take anywhere from 1 to 4 hours. The group consisted of adults between 40 and 50 years of age, most of whom were California residents. According to reports, their names were Mark McKenzie, Linda Arthur, her husband Steve, Gary Favela, Muku Reynolds, Robin Broom, and Don Teichner. Some of them had taken a canyoneering skills course prior to the hike, as they were newbies to the hobby. Others knew each other through a hiking club in Valencia, California. Together, they weren't the best team, but they had enough experience to get them through the hike on any typical day. However, that seemingly ordinary day in September held something else in stock for the hikers. Just 2 hours past noon, authorities were forced to shut down all the canyons in the vicinity following an unforeseen storm that triggered flash floods. Despite park rangers routinely cautioning hikers about the dangers of floods during monsoon season, this group had defiantly chosen to venture into the canyon. Although the reason behind their decision remains unclear, it might have stemmed from the fact that the Keyhole Canyon permits were coveted by many, as only 80 visitors are allowed to visit it per day. When the storm hit, the hikers were unaware of the flash flooding it had caused. This is because Keystone Canyon is predominantly desert terrain, and there was no means of reaching them in time to warn them ahead. Unfortunately, they ended up getting caught in an unexpected deluge of floodwaters while they were descending the canyon. It likely rushed over their heads in moments and carried them miles downstream to their watery demise. Perhaps the group's dire situation might never have been known if not for 3 other hikers who had crossed paths with them earlier during their own hike. At this chance encounter, they helped the group capture a photograph of themselves that would tragically mark the final image they would ever share. The 3 hikers, who had narrowly escaped being met by the flash floods, alerted the park rangers about the 7 hikers when they arrived back at base. With this crucial information at hand, the rangers moved to locate the hikers' vehicles to confirm if they were able to make it back. However, when the rangers arrived at their location, their owners were nowhere in sight. Typically, a search and rescue operation would have been mobilized immediately to locate the missing hikers. However, initiating one at the time was deemed too dangerous due to the storm. Hours later, search and rescue teams aided by specially trained dogs combed through several miles of the area. They searched for any sign of the hikers, be it their remains or any indications that one of them had managed to survive the ordeal. The former ended up being the case. Across 1 week, the bodies of each of the 7 hikers popped up in different locations within the canyon, confirming that the flash flood had indeed claimed their lives. The news devastated their families as well as local hiking communities, which some of them belonged to. Several months later, a memorial bench was erected at Topanga State Park to honor the memory of the hikers who lost their lives in the tragic incident.
In December 2018, Louisa Vesterager Jespersen and Maren Juland, two friends studying at the University of Southeastern Norway, were on a trip in Morocco. But their journey, meant to be an adventure, turned into a nightmare that sparked global outrage when Louisa and Maren were targeted by terrorists. Louisa Vesterager Jespersen, a 24-year-old Danish woman, and Maren Juland, a 28-year-old Norwegian woman, arrived in Morocco on December 9, 2018, eager to explore the country's majestic landscapes. They first visited Marrakesh before setting out for the village of Imlil, a popular base for tourists wanting to trek to Mount Toubkal, North Africa's highest peak. Louisa and Maren, who were also flatmates, were passionate about outdoor recreation and nature. In fact, the two young women were studying to become tour guides. As such, they were no strangers to adventures. They were well prepared for their journey and had taken precautions. But nothing and no one could have predicted what happened to them. Unbeknownst to Louisa and Maren, as they enjoyed their vacation, 4 men had decided to show their allegiance to the Islamic State, known as ISIS, with heinous acts. These men had pledged their loyalty to the terror group in a video shared on social media prior to the attack, denouncing the enemies of Allah and vowing destruction. Their leader was 25-year-old Abdesamad Ejud, a street vendor and an underground imam. Ejud, along with 27-year-old Yunus Ouaziad and 33-year-old Rachida Fati, had agreed to carry out a terrorist act on either security services or foreign tourists. After deciding to attack foreign tourists, they traveled to Imlil to look for possible targets. A 4th man, Abderrahim Kayali, initially part of the group, decided to leave before the terrorist attack would take place, but not before instructing the other 3 on how to use encrypted messaging services and to use weapons. Abdesamad Ejud, Yunus Ouaziad, and Rachida Fati watched Louisa and Maren for 4 days before deciding to strike, choosing them specifically because they were unaccompanied by guides. They attacked the women in their camp. Ejud and Ouaziad carried out the attacks, while Fati filmed on his phone. The video shows the attackers chanting jihadist slogans as they killed Louisa and Maren. Using the slogans "Enemies of Allah" and "Revenge for our brothers in Hajin," the attackers furthered their radical goals. On the morning of December 17, 2018, 2 French hikers stumbled upon a gruesome scene. They found Louisa and Maren's decapitated bodies. Their bodies were mutilated, a chilling contrast to the peaceful surroundings. The 2 French hikers alerted the authorities, and an investigation began swiftly. In the meantime, the horrifying video of the murders was shared widely, amplifying the terror. The footage was verified as authentic by Moroccan and Norwegian authorities, and its circulation added to the already present fear and outrage. 18 individuals were arrested in connection with the murders. The primary suspects, including Ejud, Ouaziad, and Fati, were apprehended in Marrakesh while on a bus, still in possession of the murder weapons. The investigation revealed their deep-rooted connections to ISIS, with Ejud having previously been imprisoned for attempting to join the group in Syria. The 3 men were charged with the murders, while several others faced various terrorism-related charges. Many around the world believed that only the death penalty could provide justice for the victims and bring some peace to their families. The victims' families, particularly Louisa's mother, expressed their profound grief and the irreparable void left by the murders. She, too, called for the death penalty. In July 2019, Ejud, Ouaziad, and Fati were sentenced to death, despite the fact that executions have not been carried out in Morocco since 1993. Their actions, filmed in chilling detail, left no room for doubt about their guilt. Abderrahim Kayali, the 4th member of the group, was initially sentenced to life in prison, but his sentence was elevated to the death penalty. Kayali took his own life in prison, awaiting execution. The aftermath of the murders saw vigils and memorials in Morocco and the victims' home countries. In Denmark and Norway, the funerals were attended by high-ranking officials and loved ones who paid their respects to Louisa and Maren. It was more than 100 years ago when the final 400-foot ascent of Half Dome, the iconic rock formation in Yosemite National Park, was fitted with cables. Standing at 8,800 feet above sea level, Half Dome has fascinated nature lovers and hikers for the longest time, despite the trickier parts of the hike. The reward, most people say, it's worth the effort. This was probably what Danielle Burnett believed, too. The 29-year-old woman loved nature and was particularly fond of hikes, especially when they provided wonderful views. And what better place for a striking view than Yosemite? Burnett, who was originally from Lake Havasu City, Arizona, and worked as a social media manager at Havasu Springs Resort in Parker, Arizona, arrived at the park on September 5, 2019. She had previously gotten a lottery-distributed permit to climb to the top of Half Dome, a necessity for all those who wish to venture on the hike. The Half Dome Trail traverses some 17 miles and gains about 4,800 feet in elevation. In other words, it's not a walk in the park. In fact, the last portion of the trail is particularly strenuous. That's why it was fitted with cables back in 1919. Hikers are advised to be cautious and avoid the trail if they're unprepared or out of shape. Even the most experienced hikers could face problems out there, with altitude sickness and changing weather being possible obstacles. But this wasn't Danielle Burnett's first time out on a hike. She was all right for the most part of the hike, that is, until she reached the strenuous and famous cable route. Sean Slimp and his group were also on the cable route when they heard a commotion above. When he looked up, Slimp saw Danielle Burnett struggling. A light sprinkle had started, which seemed to terrify Burnett. In her panic, Burnett decided getting to the top wasn't worth it. She needed to turn around even though her group continued on. Slimp watched as Burnett's shoes slipped on the rock. Then the woman fell hard. In an instant, she lost her grip on the cable and started sliding down. Slimp and one of his friends sprang into action, trying to catch Burnett. It was of no use. She was simply too far from their reach. Slimp watched in horror as Danielle Burnett slipped past. Her screams pierced the air. Then she tumbled more than 500 feet down the rocky surface. The rest of the hikers had to be evacuated so a helicopter could fly in. When park rangers arrived on the scene, Danielle Burnett was already dead. Her family was devastated. Her sister, Nicole Burnett, posted a tribute on Facebook, asking people to allow her family to grieve in privacy. It's with a broken heart to inform you all that our beautiful Danielle left us yesterday doing something she loved so much, Nicole's post also said. According to the Mercury News, Danielle Burnett was at least the 12th person since 1995 whose life was claimed by Half Dome in Yosemite National Park. In April 1992, a 24-year-old American named Christopher McCandless hitchhiked from South Dakota to Fairbanks, Alaska. From there, he left society, choosing the wilderness of Alaska as a place to test his life philosophy and to live as honestly as possible. Christopher McCandless never emerged from the Alaskan wilderness, but he became one of the most famous American adventurers, whose story still serves both as a warning and inspiration to those who want to lose themselves in the wild. After graduating from Emory University in Georgia in 1990, Christopher sold all of his belongings, donated all of his money, and embarked on a journey across North America, ultimately hitchhiking to Alaska in April 1992. He wanted to escape the constraints of civilization and society and live off the land, inspired by the works of his literary heroes like Jack London and Henry David Thoreau. Once he arrived in Alaska, an electrician named Jim Gallion gave Christopher a ride from Fairbanks to the start of the Stampede Trail. It was obvious to Jim that the young man was severely underprepared for the journey he wanted to undertake. But Christopher was undeterred and refused all offers of help. When he entered the Alaskan wilderness, Christopher McCandless, who sometimes called himself Alexander Supertramp, had only minimal supplies. He had a bag of rice, a rifle, his precious books, and some basic camping equipment. Christopher hiked until he reached an abandoned bus on the eastern bank of the Susquehanna River, known as Fairbanks Bus 142. Christopher was overjoyed at his discovery and decided the bus would be his shelter, a refuge in the wilderness. Here, the 24-year-old documented his adventure in his diary. But soon enough, the entries became darker in tone. Christopher struggled with hunger and illness, as his attempts to live off the land turned out to be much more difficult than he had anticipated. Spring turned into summer, and Christopher spent his time foraging for edible plants and hunting small game, details we know from his meticulous diary entries. At some point, he managed to illegally hunt a moose, but the meat spoiled before he could preserve it. Christopher despaired over his decision to kill the animal, which he regretted deeply. In the meantime, he grew gradually weaker. He was isolated, constantly hungry and cold. And yet, he pressed on. In July 1992, though, after more than 2 months in the bus, Christopher decided to return to civilization. He knew he was in danger. However, the once passable Teklenica River had transformed into a raging torrent, swollen by the summer runoff from the Cantwell Glacier. There was an abandoned cable car that could have carried him across the river close to Chris's location, but he didn't have a detailed map of the area. Tragically, he returned to the bus. From then on, his situation grew increasingly dire. Chris could barely even write in his diary. On August 12th, he wrote, "Beautiful blueberries, a simple observation." It would be his last one, the end of his recorded thoughts. Sometime near the end, Christopher took a photograph of himself. The photograph shows an emaciated Christopher smiling and waving goodbye while holding a note that read, "I have had a happy life and thank the Lord. Goodbye and may God bless all." It was September 6, 1992, when a group of hunters found the bus. Inside, they found what looked like a small lump inside a sleeping bag, Christopher McCandless's decomposing remains. At the time of his death, Chris weighed only 67 pounds. His body bore the signs of starvation. Authorities later confirmed that he had likely died about 2 weeks before his body was discovered. It was eventually discovered that he had ingested toxic seeds from wild potato plants, which played a factor in his death. McCandless's death sparked a complex legacy. He is now regarded as both a tragic hero and a cautionary tale. His story, immortalized in Jon Krakauer's book Into the Wild and the subsequent film adaptation, resonated with those who admired his quest for authenticity and was condemned by others who saw his journey as recklessly naive. The abandoned bus, dubbed the Magic Bus, eventually had to be removed since it had become a pilgrimage site for Christopher's admirers. Some of these admirers had to be rescued from the wilderness, while others died attempting to reach the bus. Christine Susinski had spent decades of her life as an accomplished opera singer, performing in places like Sydney, Venice, and Tokyo. Not only was she a great singer who was sought by many opera houses, Christine was also a multi-instrumentalist, wielding the cello and French horn with impressive skill. However, as she approached her old age, she decided to give it all up and move to Victor, a small town on the southeastern edge of Idaho. There, she learned to fly glider planes and eventually became an instructor, a pursuit that deepened her lifelong love of nature. On June 9, 2018, she embarked on one of her usual trips to the sky, just as she had many times before. Accompanying her in the passenger seat of her non-motorized glider was a friend named David Ross. Just before takeoff, Christine discussed the planned route with her tow pilot, whose name remains unknown. At the time, nothing seemed out of place, and the wind conditions were identified as calm. They even completed the pre-flight duties for the glider together, ensuring that the trip would proceed without any issues. Eventually, the tow pilot and his plane, along with Christine and her glider, took off from a location in Idaho. They soon reached the foothills of Darby Canyon at 11,500 feet above mean sea level, experiencing little lift at that time. Throughout the entire flight, the tow pilot maintained radio communication with Christine as they worked together to find lift and gain sufficient altitude for the glider's release. When they finally reached an altitude of 13,800, Christine then released the glider, leaving the tow pilot to return to the takeoff airport without incident. Kristen was expected to arrive at the scheduled terminal point within an hour of releasing the glider. However, she neither arrived nor attempted to communicate with the front desk to provide an update on her situation. After an hour past the expected arrival time, the front desk manager tried to contact her via radio but received no response despite multiple attempts. He waited for a while, hoping that contact would eventually be made. When none came, the glider was reported overdue, and an alert notice was issued to the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA. But just before a full-scale search and rescue effort was launched, the owner of Teton Aviation Center initiated a private search of his own using a helicopter. Guided by Christine's last known cell phone coordinates, the glider was located wedged between Middle and South Teton, above Iceflow Lake, at an altitude of approximately 10,800 feet. Sadly, it was in a wrecked state and appeared to have collided with a ridge along the side of the mountain. The Teton Aviation Center then notified the park authorities of the wreckage location. A search and rescue team subsequently reached the scene, confirming the fatalities of Christine and her passenger. Utilizing a long-line helicopter operation, the remains were recovered and transported to the coroner's office. When the aviation accident report was eventually released, it provided no clear answers, which only deepened the mysteries surrounding the crash. Investigators found no signs of pre-flight mechanical problems or missing structural components. They also claimed that the glider was airworthy, after ascertaining that it was properly assembled and that its record showed it was properly maintained. It was later speculated that Christine might have passed out during the flight, although it was never confirmed by the investigators. It was one thing and one thing only Tomer Frankfurter wanted as he climbed over the cliff edge: some really cool photos of his trip. He wasn't afraid. After all, Frankfurter knew he wouldn't be the first tourist to make risky decisions for an unforgettable memory. And he was young, barely 18 years old. At that age, everything seems possible. Everything except for the worst. It was September 4th, 2018, and Tomer Frankfurter was visiting Yosemite National Park. The young man was on a 2-month tour of the U.S., after which he had to return to his home in Israel to start his mandatory service in the Israeli army. Frankfurter spent his tour with a family friend from Fresno, California. Frankfurter and his friend arrived at Yosemite together. The day was warm and sunny. Frankfurter chose to follow the Mist Trail, Yosemite's signature hike. With awe-inspiring views scattered all along it, the Mist Trail is extremely popular with tourists. As such, it isn't exactly a lonely hike, but crowds thin out the closer you get to a truly spectacular place, the top of the Nevada Fall, a 594-foot-high waterfall on the Merced River. The more adventurous and fit tourists opt to hike the entirety of the Mist Trail in order to reach the top of the fall. On September 4th, 2018, 18-year-old Tomer Frankfurter was one of them. At some point during the hike, Frankfurter and his friend got separated. But since the Mist Trail is so popular, it wasn't long until Frankfurter found a friendly group of tourists from Israel, Germany, and other countries, and decided to join them for the rest of the day. The trail became increasingly strenuous as they got closer to the top of Nevada Fall, but the effort was more than worth it. Once they got on top of the fall, the group decided it was time to eat lunch, with a view. The place was breathtaking, with the thunderous roar of the water underlying the beauty of the valley below. As they prepared to head back, Tomer Frankfurter had a last-minute idea. He told his new friends he wanted to try and recreate a photo that got a lot of traction on social media. In it, a tourist visiting Telegraph Rock near Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, hanged from a rock outcropping as if the individual was thousands of feet above the ground. What Frankfurter didn't realize, though, was that the photo was merely an optical illusion, with the rock hanging just 3 feet above a trail below. Frankfurter tossed his backpack aside and handed his smartphone to a woman in the group, asking her to take some photos. Others in the group tried to intervene, arguing it was too dangerous, but Frankfurter was determined. He wanted those photos. Ignoring the others, the 18-year-old began climbing over the cliff edge and then dangled himself above the falls. The woman took several photos of Frankfurter. Then came a sudden plea for help. At first, some of the hikers thought the teenager was joking. But then they saw it. His arms were shaking, glistening with sweat. He was struggling to hold on. Several members of the group rushed to his aid, but trying to pull him back onto the trail turned impossible. The would-be saviors couldn't get a good grip of Frankfurter's sweaty arms, and there wasn't any equipment that could help them pull him. It was over in an instant. He slipped from their grasp. Then Tomer Frankfurter fell to his death, some 600 feet below, near the Merced River. He died on impact, becoming one of at least 300 people who died falling from a great height in Yosemite National Park. What was supposed to be a fun girls' trip in the heart of nature turned into an absolute nightmare for 42-year-old Carol Sund, her 15-year-old daughter Julie, and 16-year-old Silvina Peloso. It was on February 12, 1999, that the 3 women left for a 4-day vacation near Yosemite National Park. Carol, Julie, and Silvina left their home in Eureka, California, unafraid and oblivious to what was to come. We can only guess at the excitement the 3 women must have felt as they boarded their flight to San Francisco. Silvina was an exchange student from Argentina. She and Julie had become friends, and the Suns were very happy to host her. Once they landed, Carol rented a red 1999 Pontiac Grand Prix. They had a lot to do and see, and only 4 days before they were supposed to meet Jens, Carol's husband, back at the San Francisco airport and accompany him on a business trip to Arizona. The women's first stop was Stockton, California. There, Julie took part in a cheerleading contest. After Julie's contest, the three women hit the road again. They arrived in El Portal, California on February 14th. They planned to stay there for a few days to explore Yosemite National Park. They got a room at Cedar Lodge, a resort located only 8 miles away from the park's entrance. The women spent the following day, February 15th, hiking on one of the park's many trails. It was there in the middle of nature that Carol, Julie, and Sylvina were safest. Returning to Cedar Lodge for the night turned out to be an awful, unexpected mistake. The women left the park at some point during the evening. They were tired and wanted to unwind before getting some sleep. They had to return the rented car the next day and then meet Jens, Carol's husband, at the San Francisco airport. But in the hands of destiny, their plans were as good as nothing. Once they got back to Cedar Lodge, the group asked for some videos from the lodge's service desk. It was the last time anyone ever saw them alive. What transpired was a horrendous crime that shook America and marred national park history. On February 16th, Jens Sund was astounded to see that Carol and the girls didn't show up at the airport the way they had agreed. Jens was worried enough to contact the police. Then the facts got muddier. It seemed that checkout had been made in advance. The keys were left inside the room and nothing was amiss. But there was no trace of the women, nor of the car Carol had rented. To make matters worse, the rental car company confirmed Carol had never returned the Pontiac. Local police, rangers, volunteers, family, and friends all came together to comb through the park in a desperate attempt to find the women. 2 weeks later, Carol's wallet inexplicably turned up in Modesto intact. Were they even alive? At this point, the situation looked dire. On March 18, 1999, Jens Sund's worst fears became reality. The red 1999 Pontiac was found, tucked away off Highway 108, in the Stanislaus Forest region, a region that locals used as a dumping ground. The car was burned out. Inside the car, authorities made a gruesome discovery: 2 charred bodies which were later identified as Carol Sund and Sylvina Peloso. At this point, the FBI got involved. A week later, authorities received a note indicating the location of Julie's body. "We had fun with this one," the note cruelly said. Julie Sund's body was discovered on March 25th near Lake Pedro, in Tuolumne County. The body was severely decomposed, but the cause of death was clear. Julie's throat had been slashed. It took another crime for the killer to be caught. Joey Ruth Armstrong was gruesomely murdered near her cabin. The day before, some witnesses had spotted a blue car parked near the woman's cabin. Police used this information to find Joey's killer, and were stunned to find that all clues pointed to Carrie Stainer, a 37-year-old handyman at the Cedar Lodge Motel, who they had previously interviewed in connection to the Sund and Palazzo murders. This time, Stainer confessed. On the evening of February 15th, he held Carol, Julie, and Sylvina at gunpoint. He promised he wouldn't hurt them if only they cooperated. He lied. He bound and gagged the women, strangled and shot Carol, then sexually assaulted and killed Sylvina Peloso, too. He then brought Julie to the lake, where he sexually assaulted her and then cut her throat. Although Stainer pleaded not guilty to the murders of the Sunds and Peloso, claiming insanity, the judge decided to sentence him to death 3 times, once for each murder. Carrie Stainer is now 62 years old and still alive. It was the morning of September 27, 2014, and Izumi Noguchi, a 59-year-old man from Japan, was hiking Mount Antake. What was supposed to be a peaceful morning of walking and reconnecting with nature turned into a tragedy of massive proportions. Izumi never made it off the mountain alive. At 59 years old, Izumi was a construction company employee. An avid hiker, he enjoyed taking walks in the middle of nature, often accompanied by his wife, Hiromi. That morning, though, Hiromi had to work and was unable to join Izumi on the hike. However, Izumi had a plan so that his wife could still enjoy the views of the mountain. He decided to bring his camera along on the hike and take as many pictures as he could. The morning was more than beautiful. It was perfect for hiking. The weather was balmy, the sky was clear, and the autumn leaves had just begun to turn. Since the weather was so good and it was a Saturday, Izumi was far from being the only person hiking Mount Antake that day. Mount Ontake, standing over 10,000 feet tall, is a popular tourist destination, especially because its slopes are gentle and its trails are accessible. The mountain attracts seasoned hikers and novices alike. But Mount Ontake is no ordinary mountain. It is, in fact, an active volcano, the second highest in Japan. Izumi Noguchi took multiple pictures as he hiked, hoping to show them to his wife. When he reached Mount Ontake, the 59-year-old posed for a picture. The picture shows a smiling Izumi posing next to a sign stating the mountain's altitude. Izumi looks proud of his accomplishment. But things quickly took a dark turn. It was 11:52 a.m., just a short while after Izumi reached the summit, when the unimaginable happened. The serene beauty of the morning was shattered in a flash as a violent explosion shook the ground. Mount Ontake, which is a volcano, erupted. The eruption spewed ash, rocks, and scorching hot gases into the sky, creating a monstrous plume that could be seen for miles. It was a breathtaking sight, as unique as it was terrifying. Izumi grabbed his camera and began to document the disaster. He took a few photos showing the enormous plume of ash and smoke as it billowed from the crater, darkening the sky and engulfing the mountain. The next photos captured the cloud of ash and gases growing larger and advancing. A final image shows the ash cloud almost upon Izumi Noguchi. The cloud looks solid, as if it is a wall of gray obscuring the landscape. The danger seems imminent. Izumi wasn't the only individual who decided to take pictures of the disaster, nor was he the only one to be killed in the violent eruption. It remains unknown whether he believed there would be enough time to outrun the calamity. What is known, however, is that the eruption unleashed rocks and debris at speeds of up to 190 miles per hour. Some of those rocks struck Izumi Noguchi, killing him. Most of the victims succumbed to injuries caused by the flying rocks. Izumi's body was found near the summit's shrine compound. Many of the deceased bore the marks of the disaster, with numerous fractures and lacerations, particularly on the head and back. Many of them died running. Izumi's camera was found next to his body. The camera was dented, but the microchip was intact. As such, his haunting pictures could be recovered. Izumi's wife Hiromi later made the images public as a tribute to her husband's memory. Hiromi said she wished Izumi had fled instead of taking pictures. "I'd rather have him back," she added. There were hundreds of hikers on the mountain that day. 63 of them, including Izumi Noguchi, died in what was the deadliest volcanic disaster in Japan since World War II. Despite increased seismic activity detected prior to the eruption, Japanese authorities said there were no significant earthquakes to signal the impending disaster.
The Angel's Landing Trail has been a beloved destination in Zion National Park since it opened to the public in the summer of 1926. Renowned for its awe-inspiring views, the trail draws in hundreds of thousands of hikers annually, all eager to tackle the challenge it presents. Even under ideal conditions, navigating the Angel's Landing Trail requires remarkable coordination. The ascent is long and steady, with an elevation gain of nearly 1,500 feet. As a hiker makes the climb, they may experience dehydration, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke as they experience more sun rays. There is also no water available on the entire route, making it compulsory for every climber to carry at least a quart or two of water if they are to survive the hike. The ultimate challenge comes when climbers reach the last half mile of the trek. At this point, they must continue hiking by holding on to the chains that run parallel to the trail, or else they risk falling into the orange sandstone. Despite the trail's reputation for its challenging terrain and potential risks, 45-year-old Tate Ryan Volino from Osprey, Florida, decided to hike up the trail like countless others before him. On March 3, 2017, he began the trek, which is approximately a 5.4-mile round trip on the eastern edge of Refrigerator Canyon. Rather than joining a group hike, which often provides a sense of security and assistance in times of trouble, Volino opted for a solo expedition. His decision to go solo suggests that he was an experienced hiker, although it was never confirmed. At some point during the climb, Volino fell off one of the higher points on the trail, plummeting straight down to his death. There was no one with him when it happened, so it was unclear what led to his fall. Shortly after, a couple of hikers in the vicinity discovered Volino lying sprawled out motionless on the rocky terrain. They quickly contacted Zion Park's authorities about the situation they had encountered. Thereafter, personnel were dispatched to secure the area and close the trail from other hikers while the park's search and rescue team recovered the body of Volino. The trail was reopened later that day after Volino's body had been taken away. An investigation carried out into Volino's untimely death revealed a high visibility of trauma on his body. This was consistent with injuries sustained from a high fall, although the exact height he fell from remained unknown. His death was later characterized as a tragic hiking accident, as reported by the park authorities. It also marked the 15th death on the Angel's Landing Trail and the first for that year. While he was alive, Volino was known as a prolific writer who once worked in the financial services sector. He wrote numerous golf-themed books and fictional works, including The Front Nine and Pull the Pin. Beyond his literary pursuits, he dedicated his time to volunteering with organizations such as Habitat for Humanity, demonstrating his commitment to serving his community. Additionally, he found solace and joy in kayaking whenever he could seize the opportunity. At the time of his tragic passing, he was survived by his loving wife and 2 sons, whose names were never disclosed. In August 2022, Jital Agnahatri decided to visit Zion National Park with 2 of her friends for a hiking trip in the Narrows. She loved spending her time outdoors, but could not do it frequently due to her hectic life as a promising young PhD researcher at the University of Arizona Department of Hydrology and Atmospheric Sciences. All things considered, she saw the hiking trip as a time to relax from the stress of academia before starting the fall semester at the University of Arizona. However, just as Jital and her friends were gearing up to start their hike, Zion Park officials issued several flash flood warnings. Given that hiking through the Narrows involved wading through the virgin riverbed at certain points, the prospect of being caught in the river during a flash flood was potentially life-threatening. Regardless, Jital decided to go on the hike as planned. Meanwhile, her friends chose the wiser option of staying back, and they all planned to meet up at the visitor center's parking lot later in the evening. During the hike, the flash flood struck suddenly, turning the dry washes and smooth rock surfaces of the Narrows into a dangerous river of fast-moving water and debris in just minutes. Sadly, Jital, who reportedly couldn't swim, was swept away by the flood, along with a group of other hikers. Shortly after the flash flood, park rangers were informed about hikers being swept away. They promptly organized a rescue team to assist them. One injured hiker was discovered downstream, several hundred yards away on the Virgin River, and was immediately transported to the hospital. Several other hikers found themselves stranded on elevated ground surrounded by water, but were safely escorted to dry land once the water levels went back. The rangers then interviewed the park visitors, asking if anyone was missing from their group. When no one offered information about a missing person, they believed everyone had been located. However, hours later, Jital was reported missing, likely by her friends, when she failed to appear. This triggered an immediate search effort involving a team of swiftwater-trained rescuers, search dogs, and over 170 emergency responders. On the first day of the search, Jital remained unaccounted for. As the search efforts continued, Jital's family, who had traveled to assist in the search, anxiously awaited any updates regarding her whereabouts. Her brother even spoke with news outlets, expressing his shock at the suddenness of the flash floods and lamenting the family's anguish over not knowing what Jital was experiencing. On that same day, video footage circulated by a news outlet showed at least 2 individuals desperately clinging to broken-off parts of fallen trees as the flash flood carried them away. One of the individuals looked like Jital, although the video could not 100% confirm this. When Jital's brother was interviewed about it, he expressed deep concern that the chilling footage may have captured his sister's final moments. The search continued into the second day, with rescue officers carefully going through the areas where Jital might have been swept away by the flood. They focused their efforts on investigating the fast-flowing and deep sections of the river, as well as areas with dense vegetation and log jams. However, it wasn't until the fourth day of the search that Jital was finally discovered. She was found 6 miles south of the Narrows, already deceased, a grim reality later confirmed by a medical examiner. In the wake of Jital's passing, an outpouring of tributes flooded in to honor her memory. Her university described her as gracious, humble, and dedicated, while a close friend fondly remembered her as the most wonderful person and praised her kindness towards everyone. A funeral service was later held for Jital on Thursday, August 25, 2022, at Metcalf Mortuary in St. George, Utah.
On August 9, 2019, Simon Gauthier, a 27-year-old French art history student studying in Italy, set out to explore the untamed beauty of the coastline near Belvedere di Ciolandrea in the municipality of San Giovanni a Piero, Italy. It was supposed to be a leisurely hike, but fate had other plans. That Friday, Simon was heading from Policastro Busentino towards Naples, eager to explore the natural beauty that had captured his imagination. At that point, he had lived in Italy for 2 years. Simon lived in Rome, where he worked on his thesis. This trek was supposed to be an escape. Before embarking on his hike, the 27-year-old sent his family a photo of his backpack, perhaps a sign of his excitement and readiness for what was to come. However, what was supposed to be a day of discovery turned into a tragedy. At some point during his hike, while navigating treacherous terrain, luck left Simon. The young man fell down a cliff, breaking both of his legs in the process. The pain was excruciating, something he'd never experienced before. But Simon was alive and conscious. He knew he had to call for help. Despite the pain and panic he must have felt, Simon Gauthier managed to call emergency services. He told them he was in the middle of nowhere on the coast and that he could see the sea, but he didn't know where he was. He added he was dying of pain. Sadly, Simon's words were prophetic. Not even an hour later, he was dead due to severe blood loss. Simon probably spent his last moments on Earth in pain and afraid, waiting to be rescued. But unbeknownst to him, the authorities were facing a few issues. The rugged area where Simon fell made it nearly impossible to pinpoint his exact location. Italian emergency services, hampered by the lack of geolocation technology for emergency calls, a system proposed as early as 2009 but never implemented, struggled to organize an effective search. The delay was critical. According to some sources, it took 28 hours for the rescue teams to commence their search. Simon's friends and family, who had, in the meantime, traveled from France to aid in the rescue efforts, were devastated and disappointed by the perceived delays and inefficiencies. As days passed, over 100 rescuers, including firefighters, alpine rescuers, and a helicopter team, were deployed to scour the perilous terrain and cliffs. But there was no sign of Simon, and of course, nobody knew he was long gone. The search was complicated and tricky. It involved teams scanning the area with drones, binoculars, and even employing bloodhounds to follow any potential lead. On August 19, 2019, after 10 agonizing days, a rescuer spotted Simon Gauthier's backpack through binoculars. Soon after, the rescuers found spots of blood near the backpack, leading them to his lifeless body at the bottom of a ravine. His remains were finally retrieved, but the discovery brought little solace to those who had clung to hope for a different outcome. A preliminary investigation revealed that Simon had likely succumbed to his injuries within 40 to 45 minutes of his fall, having severed an artery in his leg and bled to death. This added another layer to the tragedy, but also a strange kind of solace, since Simon didn't actually suffer for days, the way his friends and family had feared. In the aftermath, Simon's parents considered launching an inquest into the circumstances surrounding his death, questioning the efficiency of the rescue operation. The president of the Italian 118 emergency response system highlighted the glaring inadequacies in Italy's emergency services, emphasizing that Simon could have been swiftly geolocated and possibly saved if the 2009 EU directive on the geolocation of emergency calls had been implemented.
On Tuesday, November 20th, 2022, a 33-year-old man and his 31-year-old wife, a married couple, embarked on a permitted 16-mile journey through the Narrows in Zion National Park. This hike typically involves wading through the chilly waters of the Virgin River as it winds its way through an expansive slot canyon. In this area, cell phone reception is virtually non-existent because of its distance from cell towers, and the solid rock and earth forming a canyon also absorb or weaken any signals that manage to penetrate through. While this might have seemed daunting to many, the couple definitely didn't feel this way about the hike. As planned, they quickly covered the miles in good time. However, as nightfall approached, their situation took a turn for the worse. Despite starting the hike with temperatures at a relatively comfortable 49 degrees, the weather unexpectedly plummeted to dangerously low levels. Shockingly, it continued to drop steadily, even plunging below the freezing point. The cold soon proved overwhelming for the couple as they made their way along the hiking trail. It was even worsened by their lack of proper protective gear to ward off the chill. Before long, they began exhibiting symptoms consistent with hypothermia. This condition occurs when the body's temperature drops below normal levels because it's losing heat faster than it can generate it. Sometime during the night, they decided to set up camp and wait until morning instead of pressing on with their hike. They chose a spot approximately 1.5 miles from the end of their intended route. If they had forged ahead just a little more, they would have been able to get help, as there were facilities at the end of the trail. However, they did not, and by morning, their condition had deteriorated further from the previous night. At this point, the woman seemed worse off than the man. Seeing his wife's condition, the man, who was also severely injured, summoned the last of his strength to continue the journey alone and seek help for his wife. Eventually, he encountered park visitors who swiftly came to his aid and notified the authorities. Over 20 search and rescue team members were promptly mobilized and rushed to the couple's stopping point. Upon their arrival, the search and rescue team discovered the man receiving assistance from fellow hikers. He was promptly transported to the Zion Emergency Operations Center for urgent medical treatment. Further along the trail, they located his wife near the Virgin River, where she lay unresponsive. Despite efforts to resuscitate her by one of the hikers, she did not respond. Tragically, it was soon confirmed that she had passed away. An investigation into the cause of the woman's death was initiated, although it was ultimately presumed to have been caused by the effects of hypothermia. To this date, the couple's names are still not known to the public, possibly due to privacy reasons.
It was July 21, 2021. Sophia Chung, a social media influencer from Hong Kong, was on a day trip to Ha Pak Lai, a scenic nature park near the famed Pineapple Mountain. Sophia and her friends wanted to explore the park and maybe take some pictures for her Instagram account, on which she had tens of thousands of followers. But the woman never got the chance to post the pictures from this particular trip. At 32 years old, Sophia was known on social media for her daring stunts and breathtaking shots. She had a real passion for nature photography and would often amaze her followers with her risky photos. That July morning, Sophia and her friends arrived at Ha Pak Lai around 11 a.m., ready to explore and capture the stunning scenery. Ha Pak Lai is a popular park located near the city of Hong Kong. With its lush landscapes and rugged trails, the park offers a tranquil escape. One of the park's notable features is the Tsingdai Stream, which cascades into a waterfall, creating a stunning yet dangerous spot for photography. Sophia, who was known for her fearless approach to photography, ventured to the edge of the waterfall to snap the perfect shot. Sophia's Instagram, filled with stunning photos of her hiking, kayaking, and exploring, painted a picture of a life lived on the edge. Her bio read, "Life should be fun, not dumb." As she posed for a selfie on the edge of the waterfall, Sophia's footing slipped, and she plummeted 16 feet into the pool below. Her horrified friends immediately notified emergency services, who rushed to the scene and pulled her from the water. She was rushed to the hospital, but despite everyone's swift efforts, Sophia Chung was pronounced dead at Pamela Yude Nethersole Eastern Hospital at 7:59 p.m. News of Sophia's death traveled fast, but while her admirers mourned her, others believed Sophia was fully responsible for her death. In recent years, there has been a disturbing rise in fatalities linked to selfie taking, with people often pushing the limits of safety to capture extraordinary images. From nauseating cliff edges to towering heights, the pursuit of social media popularity has driven individuals to take unnecessary risks, sometimes with fatal consequences. The sun was peeking over the icy peaks in the southern Andes on the 5th of December in 2023 when the rescue helicopter spotted them. 3 tiny, motionless figures scattered across the snowy slopes. Ignacio Lucero, 49, Sergio Berardo, 55, and Raúl Espir, 55, were expert Argentine mountaineers who had summited some of the world's most treacherous peaks. But their daring attempt to reach the top of the remote Cerro Marmolejo volcano, straddling the rugged Chilean-Argentine border, ended in tragedy just shy of the 6,108-meter, 20,030-foot summit. As the helicopter descended through the bone-chilling 80 km/h winds, a grim scene emerged on the crevasse-laden glacier below. The climbers' bodies were scattered at least 164 feet apart, frozen in place where they had tragically succumbed to the extreme conditions. Despite their remarkable mountaineering expertise full of epic conquests, the punishing weather and treacherous terrain of this rarely climbed behemoth of a mountain had proved too formidable, even for this elite team of alpinists. For Lucero, the group leader, it was a cruel twist of fate. Known affectionately as Nacho to friends and family, the 49-year-old had survived a massive heart attack in 2011 while ascending the 163-meter Manaslu Peak in Nepal's Himalayas. After battling back from a stroke and years of intensive rehab, the indomitable guide from Mendoza had notched over 60 successful expeditions across the globe, including scaling North America's 6,190-meter Denali and the 6,893-meter Ojos del Salado volcano in Chile without supplemental oxygen. Just months before their fateful Marmolejo trek, Lucero had delivered an inspirational TED Talk, recounting his remarkable recovery from his health crises and the life lessons of making the impossible possible. Despite the inherent dangers of his passions, his wife Fernanda and young son Salvi had become accustomed to Nacho's extended absences in pursuit of high-altitude adventure. On November 29th, Fernanda received a message from her husband saying the team had reached Camp 3 at 4,800 meters after an arduous 13-hour climb over treacherous crevasse fields and crumbling volcanic rock. It would be his last communication before the alpinist pushed for the summit, parting ways with 2 Chilean guides who had turned back due to deteriorating blizzard conditions. When no further updates came from Lucero's GPS locator above 5,800 meters, Chilean search teams sprang into action, braving the sub-zero winds and driving snow to scour the remote peak for the missing climbers. However, dense clouds and storms forced the initial rescue operation to be suspended after 3 days. Finally, on December 5th, a break in the weather allowed a helicopter to spot the tragic scene high on Marmolejo's flanks. Among the dead was Raúl Espir, who had recently been re-elected mayor of General San Martin. The third victim, Sergio Berardo, was considered the least experienced of the group, but had been lured by the thrill of scaling one of the world's southernmost 6,000-meter mountains, just miles from the Antarctic coast. In a heartbreaking ending, Fernanda revealed that her husband's final message was telling her and her son that he would begin his journey. This was his way of saying goodbye to her and Salvi, an acknowledgement that he was embarking on his final adventure to the heavens. The immense risks of Lucero's audacious pursuits were always lingering, but perhaps never so starkly as they were on the unforgiving slopes of Marmolejo. Why do elite mountaineers like him continue testing the limits, even after brushes with death? What drives them to take on nature's deadliest challenges when safer adventures await? And how do loved ones cope with the perpetual uncertainty of such an obsessive passion? Perhaps the answers to these questions would forever remain in the hearts of the departed thrill-seekers, braving the risks of mountain climbing. On May 19, 1996, a Sunday, 24-year-old Julianne Julie Williams and her partner, 26-year-old Laura Lolly Winans, entered Shenandoah National Park in the state of Virginia. The two nature enthusiasts were on a celebratory backpacking trip. Julie had just gotten a new job that she was set to start in Lake Champlain, Vermont on June 1, 1996. But Julie never got to start her new job. Instead, that's the date police found her and Lolly's dead bodies. But what happened to the two women? Julie and Lolly arrived in Shenandoah National Park on Sunday, May 19, 1996. They were accompanied by their beloved dog, a golden retriever named Taj. They began hiking the White Oak Canyon Trail, a challenging route which they eventually had to abandon a few days later due to rain. On May 24th, the day when they were last seen, Julie and Lolly hitched a ride with a park ranger and made sure to renew their camping permits before resuming their adventure. The next thing they did was climb Hawksbill, Shenandoah's highest mountain. That night, the two women made camp next to a stream near the famous Appalachian Stream. The couple had a camera which they'd used to take pictures up to that point. Both Julie and Lolly were nature lovers, so they knew to follow park rules. As such, they made sure to set their camp away from designated trails, fire roads, and developed areas. But they weren't too far away from civilization either. In fact, their camp was only a half-mile from Skyland Lodge, a very popular gathering place. Moreover, it was the weekend after Memorial Day, which indicated the lodge was probably packed with tourists. Still, the women knew to stay out of sight. It's no wonder they respected the rules. At 26, Lolly Winans was studying to become a wilderness guide. She loved the outdoors and believed people could find themselves in the wilderness as she had. 24-year-old Julie Williams, on the other hand, was studying to become a geologist. The pair had met about 2 years before at a nonprofit organization offering outdoor adventures and educational programs for women. It was May 31st, a week after the couple had last been seen, when Julie's father, Thomas Williams, reported his daughter missing. Park rangers were alerted and started a search for the two women. The first thing they found was Julie and Lolly's car. The vehicle was parked just north of Skyland Lodge. Park rangers then began hastily searching all adjacent trails, but they only managed to locate Taj, the couple's golden retriever. Taj was found wandering through the park, unleashed. By now, it was becoming glaringly obvious that something horrifying had happened to Julie and Lolly. The two women weren't found until the following evening on June 1st, the very day Julie was supposed to start her new job. The rangers found their lifeless bodies still at their campsite near Bridle Trail, one of the less traveled trails in the park. Julie Williams and Lolly Winans had been bound and gagged and then brutally murdered. The investigation into their murder was handled by special agents with the National Park Service, in conjunction with the FBI. Investigators used the couple's camera to map their last days in the park, up until May 24th. The crime scene was processed by the FBI, along with the Virginia State Police's crime scene unit. They concluded that Julie and Lolly had also been sexually assaulted. The National Park Service and the FBI conducted a nationwide search for the killer, following up on around 15,000 leads, but nothing came out of it. A year later, when a female Canadian tourist was threatened by a man inside the park, investigators thought they had found Julie and Lolly's killer, especially since they found hand and leg restraints hidden inside the man's car. Darrell David Rice had a history of violent behavior against women. According to prosecution documents, he became a possible suspect for a variety of reasons, including the obvious parallels in geographic location, the predatory behavior exhibited, and the exclusive selection of female victims. Videotape showed him entering the park on May 25, 1996. Rice also said he believed Julie and Lolly deserved to die because of their sexual orientation. It seemed obvious that Rice was their killer, but the case against him crumpled in 2003 when investigators tested a hair found at the crime scene and realized it didn't match either Rice or the victims. It took nearly 3 decades for Julie and Lolly's killer to be identified. In 2024, advanced DNA technology determined that Walter Leo Jackson killed Julie Williams and Lolly Winans. Jackson, who was a convicted serial rapist, died in prison 6 years ago in 2018.
On Saturday, June 5, 2021, 26-year-old Cassie Brown, an avid canyoneer and beloved guide for the Zion Adventure Company, went on a solo canyoneering trip in Zion National Park. In the past, she had often joined other local canyoneers in trying out different terrains. Other times, she had also gone with her mother, who was a fellow enthusiast. However, she chose to go alone on this particular day for unknown reasons. Given Cassie's love for the hobby and her known dedication to safety, her trip was expected to be just another normal one, filled with the thrill of exploration. However, when she stepped out that morning, none of her family could have imagined it would be the last time they would see her alive. As she made her way through the trip, Brown reached a canyon that many considered easy to navigate. Just as she descended off it, she faced a challenge she hadn't anticipated. Her rope, a trusted lifeline that had secured previous descents, unexpectedly got stuck on a rappel. She repeatedly tried to shake it free from the rope, but it refused to budge. At this point, she was at a crossroads of choice. She could either wait for people to find her or try to ascend the rope to her previous route. But since there was no guarantee anyone else would traverse the canyon that day, the prospect of spending a long night trapped halfway down seemed not to appeal to her. Brown then decided to take the bold option of ascending the rope. Regrettably, her choice proved to be ill-fated. While ascending the rope, it unexpectedly gave way at some point. This sudden release propelled her into a harrowing free fall of approximately 50 to 80 feet, ending with her body crashing mercilessly onto the unforgiving rocky terrain below. The impact instantly inflicted her with multiple severe injuries, including broken bones in different parts of her body. An hour after Brown's fall, another group of canyon explorers stumbled upon her abandoned climbing gear. To them, it clearly indicated that a hiker had run into some trouble somewhere within the canyon. Taking the initiative, a member of the party was sent back to inform Zion's search and rescue team, who immediately mobilized their resources and expertise to locate and aid Brown. As the search for Brown intensified, the search and rescue team took decisive measures to ensure her swift rescue, even though it was initially unclear where she had fallen. They temporarily closed off several surrounding hiking routes vital for accessing the canyon, such as the Narrows, Mystery, and Orderville canyons. Even popular stops like the Temple of Sinawava shuttle stop and Riverside Walk were also closed off during the search period. A rescue helicopter was also dispatched to further facilitate the search. However, the canyon's sheer steepness and narrow confines prevented it from reaching Brown's location. After a few hours, medical personnel finally managed to reach Brown, who was lying on the ground, barely alive. They began administering initial treatments and preparation for moving her out of the canyon into the hospital. But sadly, this was a futile effort. Within moments of their arrival, she passed away, succumbing to the injuries she had sustained after her fall. Brown's body was later recovered from the canyon on Sunday evening and taken to the morgue. An investigation was opened to determine the exact cause of the accident, although foul play was not suspected. Following her death, Brown received many tributes from friends and other canyoneers who frequented Zion National Park. One person said she always brought a valued and skilled perspective to the limestone slots of the Grand Canyon and was a masterful practitioner in the art of canyoning. Another person remarked that she was dedicated to service and sharing her knowledge and love of the outdoors with others.
As the search party valiantly braved the treacherous peaks of the mountain, they finally found what they were looking for. They looked at each other and, with finality, radioed in to confirm the dread of the missing person's loved ones. They reported that they had found a body at the base of the cliffs near the Ojo del Albino Glacier, and just like that, the frantic search for a missing British hiker in the unforgiving wilderness of Patagonia had come to a tragic end. As authorities rushed to the remote scene, a grim picture took shape. Recent University of Sheffield graduate David Min, just 24 years old, lying lifeless amid the boulders with unmistakable signs of severe head trauma. The adventurous Briton, taking in the breathtaking glacial scenery as part of an epic 7-month backpacking tour across South America, had plunged over 100 feet from a cliff face in southern Argentina's Tierra del Fuego region. A few days earlier, the adventurous Londoner had checked into a hostel in Ushuaia, Argentina, a city often referred to as the end of the world due to its southernmost location. Min was captivated by Patagonia's rugged and sublime beauty, a highlight in his epic 7-month backpacking tour across South America. David was scheduled to continue his journey, planning to leave for Chile on January 21st, staying at the Aonakenk hostel until his departure. The following morning, January 22nd, He left his belongings at the hostel's reception before informing fellow traveler Yuval Jacoby of his intention to go for a stroll. However, he still needs to retrieve his bag upon his return. At approximately 6 p.m. on January 24th, when the traveler failed to make his return, the hostel administration immediately sounded the alarm and informed the authorities about the incident. In response, the authorities immediately initiated a search and retrieval operation in hopes of finding the missing traveler alive. Darkness fell that first night with no sign of the missing Brit. But around 5 p.m. the following evening, a group of hikers made the heartbreaking discovery: Min's lifeless body lying face down on the rocky terrain at the base of a cliff face, miles from the nearest town. While the circumstances surrounding his fatal fall remain unclear, the evidence was undeniable. The engineering prodigy who had earned his degree from the University of Sheffield had sustained severe head trauma, having plunged over 100 feet onto the boulders below. Authorities believe he perished instantly on impact in the desolate, windswept wilderness. Police Chief Alejandro Giordano told reporters that an autopsy was taking place to discover what had happened. But it seemed clear that the hiker met his demise immediately after the fall. While the full details may never be known, his tragic final hike is a sobering reminder of the inherent dangers of venturing solo into untamed frontiers, no matter how meticulous the planning and preparation. It was a brutal end for a life brimming with potential that was extinguished in an instant. As his family began the agonizing process of repatriating his body back to Britain, many struggled with the same haunting question: what led to David Min's fatal fall from the cliff face in the remote wilderness of Patagonia? For now, Min's loved ones are left mourning a son, brother, and friend whose limitless curiosity and passion for seeing the world was fatally excessive. His tragic death is a stark reminder that even the most majestic landscapes can be mercilessly unforgiving to the unprepared. Like the pristine glacial peaks looming overhead, Min's memory will be frozen in time, his ultimate trail reaching a stunning yet cruel conclusion carved into the valleys of Patagonia. An explorer's journey was cut short far too soon. The vibrant rainbow mountain stripes attract thousands of awestruck tourists to the Peruvian Andes each year, all eager to behold one of nature's most kaleidoscopic wonders. But this past Sunday, the breathtaking 17,000-foot peak's colorful mineralized slopes became the tragic scene of a lightning strike that claimed the life of a local tour guide and left 6 French hikers injured. As a tour group followed the snaking mountain trail toward the Vinicunca's famed multi-hued crests, a suddenly turbulent afternoon storm rolled in, catching the unsuspecting travelers exposed on the high-altitude pass. A brutal lightning bolt forked from the churning dark clouds in a searing flash of blinding light and thunder. It was like an explosive fireball erupting before the guide and the tourists. One moment they were all marveling at the extraordinary scenery, and then everywhere was enveloped in a terrifying boom and acrid smoke. That's when the group realized the guide was lying motionless on the ground. The tour guide, 47-year-old Glauder Paucarmita Treveno, tragically became the latest victim killed by lightning strikes in Peru's treacherous Andean peaks this year. Despite the frantic efforts of his group to resuscitate him, the force of Mother Nature's fatal jolt proved too devastating. As for the 6 French tourists aged 22 to 40, the lightning burned and jolted their bodies with brutal force. Suffering from flash burns, concussions, and other traumatic injuries, the dazed group had to be evacuated by local emergency crews in a harrowing rescue effort along the remote mountain footpaths. Upon the rescue group's arrival, they immediately saw that the group was all in severe condition after being so close to the lightning's point of impact. Some were barely conscious. Others were screaming out in searing pain from their burns. It became clear to the first emergency responders that the biggest concern was stabilizing them and evacuating from that high altitude as quickly as possible. All were eventually rushed to clinics in the nearby city of Cusco, where doctors worked feverishly to treat the injuries. While 5 of the tourists have since been discharged, 22-year-old Gwenola LaRue remains hospitalized with a severe head injury sustained from the strike's explosive force. As this shocking tragedy continues to make international headlines, the events of that fateful day have cast an ominous shadow over the Rainbow Mountain phenomenon. What was once simply an awe-inspiring natural wonder has now become a stark reminder of the untamed power of the Andes and the potential deadliness awaiting those who underestimate it. So, where does the accountability lie? Were proper weather precautions taken before embarking on such a high-risk excursion? Should stricter safety regulations be implemented for tour companies operating in Peru's mountains? Is pursuing those perfect photographs and scenic vistas worth risking one's life? Only a full investigation into the circumstances may unearth those problematic answers, but the ghastly image of a vibrant mountain landscape one moment and a scene of charred earth, plumes of smoke and immeasurable human suffering, the next serves as a grave warning. Nature's magnificence and fury can never be taken for granted. Tiwanaut Mountain is one of the many spots in Grand Teton National Park where many hiking enthusiasts typically visit. Among those drawn to its challenge were Tyler Strandberg, Catherine Nix, and Rebecca Anderson, three friends with a shared love for hiking and outdoor sports activities. On August 22, 2015, they attempted the hike of this 12,300-foot natural structure, known to be the sixth tallest peak in the Teton Range. According to reports, the trio were not novices to climbing and had tackled several other mountain areas in the past. When they began their hike via Tiwanaut's east face without using ropes, they likely felt confident and untroubled about potential incidents. It was also known that the area they chose to climb was rated a 4.0 on the scale of difficulty. This rating indicates that, while good route-finding skills, mountaineering experience, and caution are necessary, the area is not considered highly technical by the park authorities. However, as the trio climbed the mountain, they lost sight of the official trail, a common issue for many who had previously taken this route. They soon found themselves far off course in a much more technical and dangerous area. As they attempted to navigate back to the correct trail, the unexpected happened. Tyler and Catherine slipped off a ledge and plummeted 200 feet. Rebecca, left behind in a confused and panicked state, was also unable to continue her journey either up or down because she was stuck on her own precarious ledge. After a while, she then took the initiative to contact the emergency dispatch center using her cell phone, which she still had with her. She informed them of the incident, explaining how she had tried calling out to her friends but received no response, which led her to fear that the worst had happened. Following the report, 3 rangers were dispatched via short haul to the location where Tyler and Catherine were believed to have fallen. Upon arrival, they discovered that the worst had indeed happened, as Rebecca had feared. Tyler and Catherine were found unresponsive, lying on the hard rock with their bodies severely mangled up. It was evident that they had lost their lives upon impact. After consulting with the park medical director, the rangers pronounced them dead at the scene. With nothing more that could be done for Tyler and Catherine, the rangers shifted their focus to rescuing Rebecca, who was still trapped on a ledge. 2 of the 3 rangers who responded to the call climbed steep and technical terrain for about an hour to reach her at 11,300 feet. Once they reached Rebecca, they prepared her for evacuation, and she was eventually short-hauled with one of the rangers to safety. Meanwhile, the remaining ranger rappelled down to meet his colleague, where the bodies of Tyler and Catherine lay. Their bodies were later evacuated to the coroner's office and subsequently picked up by their loved ones. It was later revealed that climbing the mountain had been one of Catherine's bucket list items for the summer, before she planned to move to New York in September to pursue a doctorate in child psychology at Pace University. Tragically, this adventure turned out to be the last item she would attempt on that list, resulting in the loss of both her life and that of her friend Tyler. In mourning their loss, Catherine's family paid tribute to her in various ways. Her brother honored her memory by running in her place in the New York City Marathon just months after the accident. Additionally, a friend completed the 100-mile Leadville Trail Run, a race in which Catherine and Tyler had previously participated. On March 7, 2012, 2 friends, Chris Onifer and Steve Romeos, embarked on a backcountry ski trip to Ranger Peak, an 11,355-foot crag located at the northern end of the Teton Range. Both were veteran backcountry skiers. Chris had worked for the Jackson Hole Mountain Resort for years, while Steve was a dedicated blogger who avidly documented his skiing experiences. In the early hours of that Wednesday morning, the 2 set out on their journey and were expected back at night that same day. However, the 2 failed to turn up and were presumed to be missing after Chris did not fulfill his plan to pick up his father from Jackson Airport that evening. With Chris and Steve also failing to make any contact with the dispatch center, it became increasingly apparent that something was wrong beyond them just being missing. As midnight approached that same day, park rangers decided to launch a rescue mission. They began by sweeping trailheads popular among backcountry skiers in the park's South District before expanding their efforts to the North District as more information became available. Chris's vehicle was then discovered near the Coulter Bay swim beach just after 12:30 a.m. on Thursday the following day. However, neither Chris nor Steve were found inside the vehicle. Despite a search throughout the night, there were no signs of their whereabouts. As dawn approached on the following morning, a search and rescue contract helicopter was deployed to ramp up the efforts to locate the missing skiers. Barely hours into the resumption of the search, 2 rangers aboard the rescue helicopter spotted an avalanche on a ridge that shapes the northern side of Waterfalls Canyon. Recognizing this as a potential area where Chris and Steve may have become trapped, the helicopter conducted a thorough search of the avalanche debris, using a transceiver suspended below to detect any signals from avalanche beacons. Before long, the transceiver registered 2 beacon hits, suggesting the presence of potentially human beings buried beneath the snow and debris. With the location now determined, a team of 7 rangers was flown back to commence a thorough probe search of the debris. Before noon that day, the lifeless bodies of Chris and Steve were discovered in a couloir on a ridge that comprises the north wall of Waterfalls Canyon. Steve was found approximately 150 feet from the toe of the avalanche, while Chris was located about 1,500 feet above Steve. Their bodies were then carefully removed from a relatively shallow depth within the debris. Initially, they were transported by helicopter to an accessible location, and then transferred by snowmobile to meet the coroner. Investigations into their tragic demise revealed that Chris and Steve were likely ascending with skins on their skis when a sizable soft slab avalanche was triggered, propelling them over 2,000 feet down the couloir. It was further determined that the cause of death was blunt force trauma, indicating that they succumbed instantly upon being struck by the avalanche. In the wake of the skiers' deaths, Steve's family decided to relaunch his blog, which had attracted thousands of visitors before the tragic incident. They meticulously cataloged the hundreds of routes he had documented during his lifetime. These routes included descents in the Tetons, Wind River Mountains, Eastern Sierras, and various locations around the world, such as Antarctica, Canada, Italy, Mexico, New Zealand, and South America. Chris was also fondly remembered as a dedicated professional who positively impacted the lives of many in the park. On July 14, 2014, Mary Margaret Beaulieu joined a guided climbing party for a hike to the summit of the Grand Teton, which stands at an impressive 13,700 feet. The team was made up of Mary, her climbing partner, and a skilled guide from Jackson Hole Mountain Guides. They embarked on their journey in the early morning hours to ensure they had ample time to cover the required distance and reach their destination safely. Given that Mary and her partner were accompanied by a professional guide, it seemed unlikely that they would encounter any significant obstacles along the way. However, just a few hours into the hike, Mary experienced an unexpected accident. As she was negotiating a short section of the climb below the upper saddle, at an elevation of 13,116 feet, she lost her footing and fell off the trail, plummeting to the bottom of the saddle. The climbing party immediately contacted the dispatch center for help, and climbing rangers who were on a routine patrol near the lower saddle moved to respond to their SOS. Despite their proximity and quick response, it was unfortunately too late to save Mary. When the rangers arrived at the location, they found Mary unresponsive, and every attempt to revive her failed. Despite wearing a helmet during the climb, it did nothing to protect her from the impact of falling from such a steep height. With no other options, the rangers pronounced her dead after consulting with the park's medical director. She was then evacuated by helicopter to the coroner's office for official confirmation of her demise. Meanwhile, other staff members from Jackson Hole Mountain Guides who responded to the scene escorted Mary's climbing partner down from the upper saddle to the lower saddle and eventually to a trailhead on the valley floor. Mary's death was shocking for one major reason. Earlier that year, she had successfully climbed to the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro, the highest mountain in Africa. This climb required her to cover a distance of almost 20,000 feet, a feat that many who attempt it do not manage to complete. It was evident that Mary was an experienced climber who knew her craft well and should have had no trouble navigating the Grand Teton. When news of Mary's demise reached her family and friends, they were shocked and devastated, given their awareness of her climbing skills. Her brother John Conley expressed their disbelief, stating that it was unimaginable that this could happen. He also described his sister as a very advanced climber and an all-around fitness buff. Away from climbing, Mary was a devoted and loving daughter, wife, mother, and sister. She was also actively involved in the family's Santa Fe tag agency in Edmond, and she participated in various charitable activities. To her friends, Mary was dependable, always showing up to help whenever they were in a bind, regardless of any discomfort it might cause her. She was eventually laid to rest on the 22nd of July at an interment ceremony attended by her friends and family. Richard Merrill stood at the entry of the Marufo Vega Trail in Big Bend National Park, a large area of rough terrain in far west Texas, famous for its harsh climate and challenging landscape. Merrill adjusted his backpack and looked at his watch, while the sun relentlessly beat down, creating harsh shadows on the dusty trail. On July 2nd, the oppressive heat of the day had already set in. The Marufo Vega Trail, a 14-mile loop, provided breathtaking views of the desert scenery. However, it was known for its difficult conditions. Hikers were cautioned about the absence of shade water and the chance of temperatures climbing over 110 degrees in the spring and summer seasons. Even though there were warnings, Merrill remained unfazed. He had previously traversed this trail and saw himself as a seasoned adventurer. As Merrill started his hike, the temperature rose, surrounding him in a stifling hug. Sweat droplets started to appear on his forehead, and he felt his throat dry with each inhale. Nevertheless, he persisted, determined to reach his intended destination. Hour after hour, Merrill slowly walked on the difficult trail, the unforgiving sun shining down on him relentlessly. With every stride he took, he felt the creeping exhaustion closing in on him, while delirium lurked on the fringes of his thoughts. However, driven by an unwavering determination, Merrill pushed himself forward to conquer the trail. As the day progressed, Merrill's body started to let him down. He tripped and wobbled, becoming increasingly slow and clumsy in his actions. He was gripped by heat exhaustion tightly, draining the energy from his tired limbs. Struggling and disoriented, Merrill battled to stay awake as he made his way toward the southeast edge of the Chisos deserts. However, as time went on, his energy waned, and eventually, exhausted and overheated, he fell to the hard ground. In the meantime, park rangers found Merrill's vehicle parked at the Marufo Vega trailhead. A message was placed on the car's windshield detailing Merrill's intention to hike from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. and asking the park to be informed if he didn't come back by that time. After 2 p.m., the rangers immediately started a search and rescue mission to find the hiker who had gone missing. As time went by, the sun went down below the horizon, creating long shadows on the desert floor. Tired yet resolute, the search and rescue teams thoroughly searched the rough landscape, driven by a feeling of desperation and fear. He wasn't discovered until the next morning. Richard Merrill was alone and lifeless, near the southeastern edge of the Chisos deserts. The community was deeply shaken by the tragedy, causing concerns about the dangers of hiking alone in isolated wilderness areas. What motivated Merrill to undertake such a dangerous solo journey? What made him disregard the alerts regarding the risks of hiking in high temperatures? What could have been implemented to avoid this tragic loss of life? As the investigation progressed, it became evident that Merrill's death is a clear warning of the dangers of going into the wilderness by oneself. Although solo hiking provided a feeling of independence and seclusion, it also exposed hikers to the uncertain elements of nature. In the end, Merrill's tragic fate was a stark reminder of the delicate equilibrium between humanity and the natural world, and the repercussions of underestimating the strength of the wilderness. The park rangers at Big Bend National Park actively monitor the meandering paths of the expansive Texas desert, guaranteeing the well-being of guests in the harsh conditions. Their watchfulness is crucial because the extreme temperatures pose a significant risk. The intense heat has been a major cause of disasters in the park. On a scorching day towards the end of June, with the sun beating down relentlessly, the rangers set out on their patrols, their radios buzzing with information and updates. The atmosphere was thick with warmth, a physical pressure bearing down on the terrain. Regardless of the scorching heat, they continued forward, determined to protect the lives of those brave enough to explore the wilderness. Isaac Irving Rosen, a lively 75-year-old from Houston, was one of the numerous hikers attracted to the rugged beauty of Big Bend, displaying a strong affection for the outdoors. Rosen was accustomed to the challenges of hiking in remote wilderness areas, showing a tough determination and adventurous spirit that surpassed his age. However, his extensive experience would be tested on that fateful day. Beginning his journey on the Chimneys Trail, a 5-mile loop famous for its volcanic formations and mildly challenging landscape, Rosen enjoyed the chance to be completely surrounded by the beautiful nature. Even with the intense heat, he continued walking, his spirits undaunted by the scorching sun beating down upon him. As time passed and the temperature kept rising, Rosen started feeling more and more exhausted, the unrelenting heat draining his energy with every step he took. With a dry throat and tired limbs, he pressed on, determined to reach his destination despite the strain on his body. However, as the sun reached its highest point and the unbearable heat intensified, Rosen's determination started to weaken. The heat and exhaustion blurred his surroundings, numbing his senses under the immense heat of the desert sun. Far away, the tall volcanic dike formation stood like ghostly guards, with their rough outlines serving as a clear indication of the unforgiving allure of the desert terrain. All at once, Rosen was hit by a wave of dizziness, causing his vision to blur and his consciousness to start to unravel. Despite the clear signs of heat exhaustion, he continued to fight through, with his strong will conflicting with the extreme fatigue that was close to overwhelming him. However, he was unable to emerge victorious from this test of endurance. Rosen's body gave in to the unrelenting desert heat as his energy dwindled and his limbs weighed down, causing him to collapse on the trail. His limp body sprawled on the hot desert ground just half a mile away from the trailhead. The rangers stumbled upon Rosen's remains by accident at 7:45 p.m. Upon the discovery of the corpse, the rangers were faced with a tragic yet puzzling sight. The details surrounding Rosen's demise were cloaked in ambiguity. What made him push himself so far? How had he given in to the heat after all his experience and readiness? What set this event apart was not only the unfortunate death, but also the victim's age, serving as a stark reminder of how older people are more susceptible to the challenges of outdoor activities in difficult terrains and severe weather. Rosen's passing emphasized the significance of acknowledging one's physical boundaries and taking necessary measures, particularly when participating in intense activities such as hiking in isolated wilderness locations. Following Rosen's death, there was a renewed push to educate people about the significance of heat safety and proper preparation before embarking on the park's distant trails. In the harsh terrain of Big Bend National Park, the distinction between adventure and disaster was frequently narrow, highlighting that even seasoned hikers faced risks in its tough environment. The intense heat from the blazing sun relentlessly struck the rough landscape of Big Bend National Park, creating shadows that provided minimal relief from the stifling heat. In the center of this expansive desert landscape, a tragic event occurred on the Dog Canyon Trail on June 18, 2017. Kathleen Weir, a Cedar Hill, Texas resident, age 46, set out on a hiking trip with her partner. As they continued their journey into the dry terrain, the unrelenting heat started to have an impact. The heat caused waves of distortion in the air, making it difficult to breathe. With every stride, Kathleen and her hiking partner experienced the heavy burden of the sun pressing upon them. Sweat droplets ran down their foreheads, drying up quickly in the scorching heat. The previously lively scenery appeared to become blurry in front of them, hidden by the haze caused by increasing temperatures. As the sun rose higher in the mid-morning ski, signs of trouble started to become apparent. Kathleen and her companion experienced a gradual decrease in their energy as their bodies surrendered to the relentless effects of dehydration and heat exhaustion. Their dry mouths made it difficult for them to breathe in the oppressive air. With every stride they took, the path continued to spread out in front of them, without any end in sight, serving as a harsh reflection of the harsh wilderness enveloping them. The intense heat felt like it was penetrating deep into their bones, draining their energy and determination little by little. Despite the scorching heat, Kathleen and her companion persisted, fueled by a resolute resolve to conquer the path ahead of them. However, as time passed, their morale started weakening, burdened by the stifling heat surrounding them like a suffocating blanket. By midday, the signs of distress had become impossible to ignore. Kathleen and her partner stumbled along the trail, their movement sluggish and labored. The once vibrant landscape had become a desolate wasteland, devoid of life and hope. It was at that moment when Kathleen's companion made the crucial choice to ask for assistance, embarking on the difficult trek back to the starting point in a last-ditch effort to get help. They felt as if time had frozen while they waited for assistance, with each moment feeling like an endless stretch in the sweltering heat. However, even with the quick reaction from park officials, it was already too late. When assistance finally reached the scene, Kathleen's limp body was found among the rough landscape, a heartbreaking casualty of the harsh elements that had ultimately taken her life. Her death was later found to be caused by environmental hyperthermia, showing the deadly mix of high temperatures and harsh terrain. On that fateful day, the temperatures reached an astonishing 110 degrees, covering the surroundings in a stifling layer of heat. The family and acquaintances of Kathleen were left pondering one crucial question as word of her untimely death circulated. What compelled Kathleen and her partner to continue on the arduous journey, despite clear warnings and indications of intense heat on that tragic day? Kathleen Weir's tragic destiny was not a singular occurrence. In the year 2016, 4 individuals perished in the park due to the dangerous conditions, each meeting a tragic end in their own unique manner. From horrific accidents to deadly allergies, Big Bend's wilderness showed no mercy to anyone. Dean Potter and Graham Hunt spent the afternoon of May 16, 2015, clearing trees and brush from Potter's recently bought property. The day had been rainy and cool, but as the skies cleared and the light dwindled, the 2 adventurers decided to head toward Yosemite National Park for a jump off Taft Point, a 500-foot promontory that overlooks some of Yosemite's most famous landmarks. The call of the wild, the call of adventure, was almost inescapable for the 2 men. Yosemite National Park was the background and reason for many of their adrenaline-filled experiences. The men knew that what they were about to do wasn't considered a go-to pastime activity for most people. But they weren't most people. They were base jumpers using their wingsuits and parachutes to dive off impressive cliffs from astonishing heights. At 43 years old, Dean Potter was one of the world's most experienced base jumpers and a legendary daredevil athlete. 29-year-old Graham Hunt was Potter's apprentice. But base jumping is illegal in all national parks. That's why they usually had to wait for dusk or dawn before attempting a jump. Otherwise, they could risk having their expensive gear confiscated, or even spending months in jail. Potter and Hunt arrived at Taft Point along with Jen Rapp, Potter's longtime girlfriend. Rapp was to act as a spotter and photographer for the adventurers. At about 7:25 that evening, the 2 men were zipped up into their suits, ready to jump. They'd noticed a slight breeze picking up, but Potter's vast experience told him it was nothing to worry about. Neither of them was concerned. They had made the jump plenty of times before, together or alone. They cherished and sought the unique feeling of the drop, the adrenaline, and the gentle caress of the air as their wingsuits inflated. They planned to fly right toward the valley. To do this, the men had to clear Lost Brother, a ridge that extended downward, ending in a vertical wall. The ridge had a notch, a V-shaped indentation that was familiar to both jumpers. Hunt usually went through the notch, but Potter preferred to go around the ridge to the left. Potter was the first to jump. Hunt followed. Rapp snapped pictures, but the men quickly fell out of frame before the lens caught them again, this time soaring. Hunt naturally passed Potter. His suit was made for speed, while Potter's was adapted for long flights. Dean Potter often tried to improve his tactics. In fact, he'd spent some time in Canada working on a new design meant to allow him to land without using a parachute. He also constantly advocated for base jumping. Potter thought the sport should be legal in national parks, which he believed provided a great number of naturally safe spots for jumping. But something unexpected happened that evening. As Jen Rapp took pictures, she could see Graham Hunt veer left. Hunt immediately changed his mind and veered back to the right. Meanwhile, Dean Potter headed toward the notch. They disappeared into the hole out of Rapp's line of sight. Then a noise. A second, duller, heavier noise followed. Rapp couldn't imagine the worst. She waited for a signal from the men, but nothing happened. Rapp left the park and met with Rebecca Haney, Hunt's girlfriend. Hayne was worried sick. When it became clear that something terrible might have happened, the two women contacted Mike Gauthier, Yosemite's chief of staff. Gauthier was the one to assemble a team from Yosemite Search and Rescue. If Potter and Hunt were still alive and injured, time was of the essence. The team searched for hours to no avail. It wasn't until the following morning, on May 17th, that Potter and Hunt were found, when a California state helicopter joined the search efforts. The pilots used RAP's photos of the previous evening to pinpoint the likely location of the crash. Two rangers were then short-hauled onto the site. Dean Potter and Graham Hunt were dead. The bodies were recovered, and a memorial was set up on Taft Point. Feathers, a beer can, Tibetan prayer flags, and a photograph of Potter adorned the viewpoint when RAP returned there, 3 days after the accident. The cause of the accident still remains a mystery, although theories abound. Some say Potter saw Hunt hit the wall and lost his focus, which caused his own crash. Others think Hunt's maneuvers and crash caused air disturbances, which carried Potter to his death. Potter had jumped with a smartphone strapped to his head, but the device was too damaged by the impact. The only one who knows the truth is Yosemite itself. El Capitan, or the Chief, is Yosemite National Park's best-known landmark, a vertical rock formation looming 3,000 feet above the park. To some, El Capitan is one of Mother Nature's beautiful creations. To others, it's just some big rock. But there's also a special category of people, those who see El Capitan as a way of life, a place that feeds the soul. 42-year-old Tim Klein from Leona Valley, California, and 45-year-old Jason Wells from Boulder, Colorado, were part of this special category of people. They were immensely experienced climbers, having conquered numerous walls and peaks. Both Klein and Wells regarded El Capitan as a one-of-a-kind place. Wells even called the granite monolith his magic stone. On the early morning of June 2, 2018, Tim Klein and Jason Wells were already up and doing what they loved best, speed climbing the 10-pitch freeblast portion of El Capitan's Salate wall. Their goal was straightforward: make an in-a-day ascent using a technique called short fixing. This wasn't the men's first rodeo. Klein and Wells had climbed El Cap about 70 times together, and they had nearly 200 El Capitan ascents between the two of them. The two men had almost legend status amidst the climbing community. They were known for always being joyful and, more importantly, swift and safe. They had been friends and climbing partners for decades, which enabled them to lap the monolith multiple times in the same weekend, or even twice in the same day. This time around, Klein and Wells were joined by a third climber, Kevin Prince. It was a typical busy Saturday on El Cap. Several teams of climbers were both ahead and behind Klein, Wells, and Prince. As the three men made their way up the Salate wall, they encountered Jordan Cannon and his team. They quickly passed Cannon, motoring up the wall. When Cannon looked at the men, it seemed to him that Wells and Klein were simul-climbing. If his observation was correct, then Klein and Wells were tied into the same rope while moving at the same time. Cannon also noticed that Prince was solo climbing up a rope that Klein had secured to bolt anchors positioned above the $50 portion of the climb. It seemed to Cannon that the men moved quickly, short fixing without placing much protection. As Jason Wells and Tim Klein made their way through pitch 9 or 10, a moderately difficult portion of the climb, approaching Mammoth Terraces, luck and experience failed them. It was about 8:15 a.m. when Jordan Cannon, whom the men had passed earlier, heard a thud coming from above. When he looked up, Cannon saw Jason Wells fall about 196 feet before stopping briefly. Then Wells fell even farther and hit the wall. Almost instantly, Cannon heard Tim Klein screaming. Klein fell too. Their rope caught behind a block, suspending the men in the air for a very short moment. But then the rope was severed, dooming Wells and Klein. The men fell to their deaths about 1,000 feet to the ground. Authorities couldn't determine why the two experienced climbers fell. According to Cannon, it was also impossible to determine if they had gear between them due to the rope being severed a few feet above Klein's knot. Their accident thus became yet another Yosemite mystery. Both Tim Klein and Jason Wells are remembered fondly by those who knew them, and by those who were inspired by the duo's extraordinary performances. Klein was a beloved teacher at Palmdale High School, who earned Teacher of the Year twice. He leaves behind his wife and 2 young sons. Wells worked as an investment manager and is remembered for his immense love of climbing. Gary Falk was a family man with a wife and 2 young sons, working for the Exum Mountain Guides, an organization that leads groups to the summit of Grand Teton. For over 12 years, Gary dedicated himself to his job and was known to spend summers in the park's Jackson Hole and winters in the San Juan Mountains of southwest Colorado, guiding other explorers as a part-time job for another organization named Mountain Trip. On July 23, 2016, Gary went on a routine climb to the summit with a group of students from a program called City Kids. During the upward journey, they encountered no issues, successfully reaching the summit as planned. But just as they began their descent down the mountain, something happened. According to reports, the downward journey required that each person use a friction descending device known as an ATC. However, Gary realized that he had no ATC to himself due to a last-minute rearrangement of climbing teams from his company. Instead of seeking assistance from his company, Gary chose a more risky approach to solve a problem. He planned to use a belay rope to recover a dropped ATC device that a chaperone had lost. Unfortunately, when the chaperone rappelled down to retrieve the ATC, both the device and the rope became stuck in a crevice during their ascent to the summit. Despite the setback, Gary remained determined to solve the problem himself. He attempted to dislodge the jammed rope and ATC by flipping them within the crevice. Tragically, during this attempt, Gary suddenly fell a harrowing 2,400 feet to the unforgiving rock face below. The group he was with then contacted Teton Interagency Dispatch to report his fall, while still shocked and devastated by the incident. Immediately, park rangers launched a reconnaissance flight with a helicopter to assess the scene. 2 rangers then rappelled down and hiked to reach Gary's location. Upon their arrival at the place where Gary fell, they determined that he was already deceased and needed no medical attention, then began arrangements to recover his body, and they eventually used a helicopter long line to do so. Meanwhile, another Exum guide helped Gary's clients down the mountain to safety. It's believed that while Gary was attempting to free the stuck equipment, he leaned out from the rock face, putting tension on his self-belay tether, known as a lanyard, which was securely anchored to his rappel rope. Unfortunately, the tubular webbing, which Gary had tied into a loop with a water knot to tether himself to the anchor, came untied, resulting in his tragic fall. This theory was supported by shreds of evidence obtained by the climbing rangers who retrieved Gary's body. They had found the webbing still attached to Gary's harness with a hitch knot, but its 2 ends were not tied together as they needed to form a tether. In the wake of Gary's death, Wyoming's Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, launched an investigation into the safety practices of Exum mountain guides. While OSHA determined the company wasn't directly responsible for Gary's death as he used his personal gear, they did identify violations of safety regulations. Specifically, OSHA cited Exum mountain guides for failing to ensure the adequacy and proper maintenance of employee-provided safety equipment and maintain a written plan to limit guides' exposure to bloodborne pathogens during first aid procedures. As a consequence of these violations, OSHA imposed a $7,350 fine and mandated compliance with the aforementioned safety regulations. Gary was laid to rest days after the coroner officially certified that he was deceased. A GoFundMe campaign was later established to support his wife and children, raising nearly $200,000 to help them cater to their needs.